and 80 or 90% of the things found in Madagascar are only found in Madagascar, like lemurs. So you don't find those anywhere else in the world. Other insects, trees, things like that. You just don't find anywhere else. It's very unique in that way. It's the fourth largest island in the world. So it is an island. Doesn't, really feel like one, depending on where you're at. I mean, if you're on the coast, obviously it does. But it's very large. The people are very diverse as well. There are about 18. I think there's 18 different tribes, if you want to call it that, of people. So 18 different dialects, I guess, of the language as well. And by saying dialects, makes it sound like they're not very similar, and some of them aren't. They're very different. You won't understand someone that's from way down south. But for most part, everyone speaks the main dialect, and then there's the emphasis of their other dialect that comes in and kind of affects the way they speak sometimes. So it is a little difficult at times to understand people, but for the most part, they'll understand what you say, and you might not understand what they say, but they'll understand what you're saying if you're teaching or something. So a lot of missionaries will pick up a different dialect as well, just because they have to in order to communicate effectively, especially down south. And with that different dialect and area difference, there's also kind of like cultural pride, I guess, and they hate certain groups, or they don't get along well with other groups, and so they won't really respond well to you using that main dialect, and they'll want you to change and to learn interesting words or interesting ways of expressing things, because otherwise they won't understand you. Malagasy's life is pretty simple. They don't have a lot, obviously. It's a third world country, and they're very poor, but they're very hardworking. They'll be up at 4 or 5 in the morning already working, but depending on what their job is. A lot of times they work in the rice fields. It's very typical Africa or Asia when you think of working with rice. So they'll work out in their fields until about 2 in the afternoon, and they'll come home, and that'll be the rest of their day. Probably to beat the heat, probably just to get a start on the day, but they're up really early. So I'd say that's what a lot of people do out in the country. So most of the areas I worked in, most people were farmed rice or things like that. Other than that, I don't know that there is a typical Malagasy job, but it does depend on the area. Like my first area was on the coast, and so they spent a lot of time in the port. It's the biggest port for Madagascar. It's called in Tamatov. It's the name of the city, and a lot of people there work for the port. A lot of people work for the government. Well, not the government, but like police or military. So they're like security guards or stuff like that. People were fishermen. Like I taught a couple of people who were fishermen. But then there's also just odds and ends types of things that people will do for jobs just so they can support their families. They'll just sell stuff on I guess we call it street vendors. They'll just sell stuff on the side of the street, whatever it is that they have, they want to market, and they'll try and sell that. They also, taxi drivers, a lot of those, obviously. And then in some areas, some of the provinces, they have these things called pousses. I think in English it's called a rickshaw, I'm not sure. But basically you sit in it and the people pull you. So it's like a taxi, I guess. I mean, it's getting you from one place to another. So there's guys that pull those. So they obviously have to be pretty fit to be able to do that. But at the same time, they're just, teeny. Like the people that are really small, they're not, big. They're very, Asian size, smaller. So it's impressive that they can carry around 2, American missionaries that are, as they would tell us, we're big, and try to charge us more money because we're big. So a lot of people make their living off of that. So there's a lot of different jobs, and I wouldn't say there's a typical one other than farming is a pretty big one. So along with that, because they farm a lot of rice, they eat a lot of rice. They eat rice probably 3 times a day. I would say the poorer ones would eat rice 3 times a day. I know some members that would be like, no, there's no way I'm eating rice 3 times a day, because they don't like it, or whatever it is. But that's definitely their main, staple in their diet. And they were always surprised because they'd ask us, what's the main thing in your diet? And it's like, I don't know. Like, that's a good question. Do we really have one thing that we use a lot? And I don't think we really do. And so, but for them, it's rice, and then they put this thing called loke on top of it. Basically, what that is just anything that we can put on top of rice is what loke is. So there's all sorts of different kinds: beans and meat and vegetables and what have you. And it's really, really good. I love it. I love Malagasy food, and so that's their typical meal that they would eat.
I had the chance for probably half my mission. I lived in an apartment in Saint Denis, which is the capital of La Réunion. It's Saint Denis, if in English, and it's the largest city on the island, and very, like I said, obviously very mixed culture, just by what the island is like. But I remember just living in the city. We had a lot of opportunities to see. There's a university there. There's a lot of younger people, and a lot of the more French and European people live in the city. And but so the whole city is kind of just mounted on the mountain, and so it made, if you didn't have a car or something, it would be very hard to get around, because it's just all on a hill. And so there's a lot of beautiful houses up on the hill, but as you go down, there's a lot of tall apartment, not very tall, maybe 5-6 floor apartment complexes, and that's what kind of dominates the city for housing arrangements, is these apartment complexes that are sometimes newer and sometimes older, and have got a lot of African immigrants in the city, kind of in the apartment complexes like that. And I can remember waking up every day, and we actually have this balcony that looks over the city and the ocean, and a view that I miss. But you can see, and there's just roads, and people will say this about a lot of the world outside of America, everyone's got a scooter. Everyone's riding around on a little moped and just getting up this mountain. You can hear it going around, and but no, just those are everywhere on the mountain. And we actually got to spend some time in the city, either for kind of the business part of being a zone leader and helping visa paperwork and doctor's appointments and stuff like that, but also once a month. At the beginning of the month, the first Saturday of every month, was called a marché de nuit, which is it's like a night market, and it was a big cultural event that they had every first Saturday, that we were allowed to go to as missionaries to meet people and just kind of be around. And we went with the senior couple at times, and it was a big market. Just they closed down the street and everyone's there. There's music playing, there's sometimes little performances, and we got to just see everyone together. And there's all these different, to market, there's a lot of booths with foods and crafts that people make and sell. And it's just a big, like, as far as Saint Denis, what goes on, everyone wants to be at the night market the first Saturday of the month. So it was a great cultural event.